Hey guys, so I hope you're having a good quarantine, and I am gonna read for you from Matthew. So I'm gonna read Matthew 27, 45 through 54, and Matthew 28, 1 through 10. So Matthew 27, 45 through 54 goes like this. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. But the rest said, Wait, let's see whether Elijah comes to save him. Then Jesus shouted out again, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said, This man was truly the Son of God. Okay, so now I'm going to read Matthew 28, 1 through 10. Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. The angel spoke to the women. Do not be afraid, he said. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come, see where his body was lying. And now, go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you. The women ran very quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. And they rushed to give the disciple the angel's message. And as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they ran to him, grasped at his feet, worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, Don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there.
Well, happy Easter, guys. This truly is the most exciting day in all of history, and I really hope that you take a moment to review and remember what God has done and celebrate with your family. I'd like to just real quick sort of jump into a little bit of what Matthew read for us, and then we'll get you on to the other video. So first thing I wanted to point out is just on Friday, we know that Jesus died, right? Good Friday. He paid for our sin. And in chapter 27 of Matthew, in verse 50, we see this moment where he dies, and we see that he released his spirit, that the curtain in the sanctuary was torn in two, and we've learned that this means that the way to God was now open. Jesus truly had forgiven our sins, and we could go to God. We're no longer separated. And then it also says the earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened, and the bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. Now think about that. That's some craziness. Okay, you're hanging out in the city. You've heard that Jesus is going to be crucified. You're like, I thought he was kind of a good guy, but I guess they're going to crucify him now. And then next thing you know, great grandma comes up from the dead and is knocking at your door. You got to believe, whoa, this is a big deal. And I think a lot of people come to the same realization that the Roman officer does in verse 54. It says, the Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. And they said, this man truly was the Son of God. Jesus' death already proved that he was the Son of God. And it proved that his sacrifice was acceptable, that he had truly made a way for us to God. But if the story ended there, I mean, we'd be forgiven, but it's not really a good story. It's a sad story, and you could make the claim, maybe we wouldn't be forgiven, because you could make the claim that the sacrifice, we don't know if the sacrifice had been accepted. But the good news is today, Easter Day, 3 days later, Jesus comes back from the dead, and that proves to everyone that God is in control, and he has done what he set out to do. So in chapter 28, we read about his resurrection. And I just wanted to point out in verse 5, the angel tells Mary and the other women, "Don't be afraid. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He has risen from the dead, just as he said would happen." I mean, Jesus called his shot. I mean, this was the plan that God had since the beginning of the world. You know, he knew that we wouldn't be able to keep up our side of the covenant. So he gave us a new covenant with the Last Supper. And then Jesus went and paid. He drank down all of the cup of God's wrath, like it's called in the book of Psalms. All of God's anger against sin was poured out on Jesus. His body was broken for us. And then, just to prove that he was king, to prove that he was in control, and to show that the sacrifice had been accepted, he raised from the dead. He marched up to the gates of hell, grabbed them, ripped them off their hinges, and said, "Nobody else is going to stay in here if they call on me." And that is the most exciting news. So really, I just want you to reflect on that and think about that. Jesus endured all of God's anger for your sin. And then, because he didn't want to miss out on the fun, he came back to life. And now he promises to give his Spirit to us. He promises to come and live with us and guide us through life until we finally go and spend the rest of eternity with him. And that is some amazing news. So I really encourage you to spend some time thinking about what Jesus did, thanking him for what he did, and celebrating what he's done. He is risen.